Hello and welcome to Chapter 3, Biology and Behavior. Okay, we're going to go over this chapter as painlessly as possible. It's kind of one of those dry chapters, but a necessary chapter to cover. So, like I told you before, the chapter always begins with a vignette, and it carries through the entire chapter somebody's story. So this is the vignette for this chapter. All right, so where do we begin? So our bodies, our brains, our psyche communicates with our physical body. So anything that's biological is going to be simultaneously psychological. So that's kind of like what we always say in psychology. But your nervous system is this cool network that really just communicates with your entire body, sending all of these electrical and chemical messages, and it kind of does all the work for you. So you're just kind of like going through the motions while the body just kind of takes care of itself. Our brain is probably the coolest, most dynamic part of our body because it provides that link for us to be able to think and feel without really kind of understanding it. So we know it's there, but it just kind of works. And it contains all of these nerve cells that just communicate with each other. So it's like when you, for instance, if you cut yourself and you hurt yourself, you think that your body felt it first, but really it's your brain that felt it and that sends it down to your body. So it's pretty cool. All right, so from bumps to brain scans. So why is the brain considered the last frontier of scientific discovery? So scientists developed a pretty direct way of understanding how our individual brains work and how they communicate with each other, but they don't exactly yet have a definitive answer to all the big questions about our nervous system, like what is consciousness and how are memories stored? And that's why researchers are continually studying the brain to find out those answers. So some history about the brain, not really going to go into this, but Franz Joseph Gall and Pierre Flourens are the kind of earliest in studying the brain, looking at phrenology, which is the earliest approach to explaining the functions of the brain and kind of trying to link the physical structure with the skull. And unfortunately, it's kind of discredited now, so we don't even really look at that. All right, so contemporary methods of studying the brain. We're not really going to go into this. We don't need to. All right, so how do you study the living brain? So there are, multiple ways. So you can look at the structure or the function. So structural scans are like CAT scans. If you've ever heard of CAT scan or an MRI, many people have had them. So those look at the structure of the brain. And then you have the EEGs, which are electroencephalograms, and then PET scans, and then fMRIs. And those look not only at the structure, but they also look at the function of the brain. So all I really want you, to know is just understand the difference between the different structural and functional brain scanning imagery techniques. All right, so can you identify the structure of a typical neuron? So we're just gonna run quickly through all of these terms, not really gonna focus too much on them. So here is kind of a picture for you to kind of visualize what this looks like inside of your body. It's kind of weird looking, but these are all of the different neurons and all of the things that they do to help your brain work. All right, so glial cells serve as the glue of the nervous system. And some of the classes of glial, gotta say that 3 times fast, cells are microglia, astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, and Schwann cells. And again, this is going to go with the vignette. At the bottom, it says, describe the function of the glial cells after Brandon's injury. So if you're following that vignette, then you would want to look into this. All right, so processes inside the neuron. The neuron is surrounded by and filled with positive and negative electrically charged ions. These are things that you already learned way back when in school that you probably forgot, but if you're a bio major, then this might interest you. Difference in some of the positive and negative charges determines the overall charge of that neuron. And the two processes direct ion flow into and out of the cell. You've got diffusion and then electrostatic pressure. I know this is all so exciting, so we're going to kind of go through this pretty quickly. All right, so we're just going to skip on through that. So you've got your resting potential and then your action potential. So when your neuron is at its resting state, the particles on the outside of the cell are being pulled basically towards the membrane, and they cannot move inside. And then the spike in voltage, which passes through the axon of a neuron, is what is called the action potential. So if that explains it a little better, not that you need to really know all that for here. Here again is the potential and kind of what its job is, what it does. All right, so what happens after this sudden jump in voltage? So resting potential is reestablished in order to return the neuron to now its natural state. So because the ions are no longer at equilibrium, all of this stuff is kind of happening, and then this is kind of its way of going back to like reset mode. All right, so again, communicating with the neurons, moving down the axon. This is kind of like we're traveling through all of this kind of motion or whatever. So the action potential occurring in one axon segment causes a voltage change into the next, initiating an entirely new action potential there. So then it keeps going on like a wave, and then it moves on to the next part when you get to your excitatory signals. So again, if enough sending neurons signal the receiving neuron to pass along the message, their combined signal becomes excitatory and the neuron then fires. So you then have what is kind of the opposite, which is the inhibitory signals, and they inhibit neuron from releasing a signal through the axon. So I forgot what I was going to say. Revisit the darn analogy. Imagine that thousands of people are yelling at the person in charge of the gate. Some shouting, "Open it!" And others screaming, "Don't open it!" If enough people are in favor, the gatekeeper will open the gate. So that's the explanation of that. Kind of whatever, but that's the explanation. All or none. Your all or none is your neuron that either fires or it doesn't fire. So it's either going to do it or it's not going to do it. So the neuron conveys stimulus strength by firing more often and delivering its message to more neurons. Okay, are you guys excited yet? Okay, I am. Moving on. All right, so now the role of the myelin sheath. All right, so that is a protein that envelops and insulates the axon, facilitating faster transmission of the impulse. You've got the white matter and the gray matter. It insulates and protects the tiny voltage changes occurring inside the axon. The myelin sheath is actually very important part of your body. This is important. Hold on one. Okay, sorry, hiccup. Had to answer a message really quick. Okay, so moving on, the myelin sheath is really important when it comes to, issues like MS. So it's very important that protein is insulating and working properly, because that is what's linked to MS. All right. Okay, so Heading off injury. So repeatedly heading a soccer ball exacts a toll on an athlete's brain, but the cost is greater for women than it is for men. A lot of people don't realize just how dangerous soccer actually can be. So in the book, you'll see that there is a study about some women athletes that had soccer injuries. So you can check that out. There you go, right there. All right, so kind of moving on, you've got your neurotransmitters, your receptor sites, and then your reuptake. So your neurotransmitters are your chemical messengers that neurons use to communicate at the synapse. Then you have your receptor sites. That's the location where the neurotransmitters attach on the receiving side of the synaptic gap. And then the neurotransmitter must fit a corresponding receptor site to convey its message, similar to a lock and key. Unfortunately, with this chapter, I'm kind of just reading it to you and discussing a few little things because there's not really much you can go off into this chapter, which is kind of why this chapter is pretty boring. But when we talk about reuptake, it's similar to like recycling. So instead of requiring the neurons to continuously manufacture neurotransmitters, by reabsorbing what NT doesn't bind with the postsynaptic neuron, the neuron can conserve energy and reuse the neurotransmitter during the action potential. So that's kind of what the, reuptake is responsible for. So again, we're going to skip over this. All right, so researchers have identified approximately 100 different types of neurotransmitters, with many more that are yet to be discovered, but really we're only going to focus on a few of them that you would need to know for this course. So I do want you to know the differences between these neurotransmitters. So acetylcholine, that's implicated in myasthenia gravis. I know, say that 3 times fast. It's a disease that's characterized by muscle weakness and fatigue. In this condition, acetylcholine transmission is inhibited. So if you have too much, you'll have spasms, and if you have too little, that could lead to paralysis. And also, low levels in the brain have been linked to Alzheimer's disease. So I do want you to know that for an exam, that acetylcholine, if you have too many low levels, then that's linked to Alzheimer's. Glutamate is your excitatory transmitter, plays a central role in your learning and memory. If you have too much, that could lead to strokes. And if you have too little, that's been linked to schizophrenia. And you don't need to know anything for that for the test. GABA is an inhibitory transmitter that plays a role in controlling your sleep and wakefulness. Deficiencies in GABA have been linked or have been implicated with having anxiety, panic disorder, and PTSD. So you will, if anybody is diagnosed with that, then that is going to be a neurotransmitter that is affected. Long-term use of alcohol can decrease the production of GABA, as well as the responsiveness to its receptors. Norepinephrine plays a variety of roles in the brain. It's involved in regulating your arousal and sleep, and then high levels could lead to over-arousal and hypervigilance. I do want you to know both serotonin and dopamine. Specifically, I want you to know that serotonin is linked to depression. Serotonin is very important, is a very important neurotransmitter for you. This helps you control your appetite, aggression, your mood. It regulates your sleep and breathing. It is thought to drive your depression. That's why a lot of depression medications, you'll notice your SSRIs. They are what help boost those levels of serotonin. And then dopamine is what plays a key role in your attention and learning. Also implicated in the abuse of certain substances, including cocaine and methamphetamines. I'm sorry, not just amphetamines, my bad. Irregular activity may underlie schizophrenia and depression. So you'll notice that a lot of these neurotransmitters kind of, they work for different things. So it's really important to go to the doctor, get your annual visit. If you're not feeling right, if something is feeling off, go to the doctor and get checked out. All right, your endorphins, those are your naturally producing opioids. So a lot of people don't realize that you already have these naturally producing opioids, which are called endorphins, and they're released in response to pain, and they block pain receptor sites. And then they're also released when you exercise. So what's called like runner's high, if you jog and then this like energy kicks in and you feel good, those are your natural endorphins kicking in. All right, so here's just a table of all of the different neurotransmitters, their functions, and then kind of like did you know this about this neurotransmitter? All right, we're not going to go over agonist, antagonist. You don't need to really know that for any type of test. But interestingly, an antagonist example is Botox. Little fun fact if you wanted to know that. All right, so where's my morning antagonist? So how many of you consumed caffeine today? Well, I can tell you, here's my coffee right now. Okay, so back in my undergrad, I had to do a paper, and I got to choose what type of paper I wanted to do. And I did the benefits of drinking coffee, because drinking caffeine actually does have benefits. Obviously, it has drawbacks, but it has benefits as well. So if you take in the right dose of caffeine, this can help you with your reaction time, your attentiveness, believe it or not, your reasoning skills, even after days of reduced sleep. The drug even may boost your ability to form long-term memories. Some research even suggests that it may enhance stamina and endurance when you are exercising. But of course, you don't want to have too much caffeine because there are setbacks of, that as well. All right, caffeine's chemical structure is similar. It allows it to dock at the same receptor site, which prevents adenosine from latching on. So if you're, obviously this course is just designed to, or this chapter is just designed to kind of touch on all of these little terms. And if you're a biology person, then definitely you could take a whole semester on biological psychology. All right, moving on to your nervous system. You've got your central nervous system, your CNS, or your peripheral. Your central nervous system is your major component of the human nervous system, and that includes your brain and spinal cord. And then your peripheral is the part that connects the central nervous system to the rest of your entire body. Your spinal cord is the bundle of neurons that allows communication between the brain and the peripheral nervous system. So basically, what happens if these pathways are blocked? So if this is blocked, then the commands from your brain are not going to be able to reach the muscles that are responsible for making you walk, talk, and do all those things that you do on a daily basis. All right, so your types of neurons, you've got your sensory neurons, your motor, your interneurons. Your sensory receives information about the environment from the sensory systems and conveys it to the brain for processing. Your motor neurons then carry the information from the central nervous system to produce that movement. And then your interneurons reside in the brain and spinal cord. And that basically acts as a bridge that connects the sensory and your motor neurons. Are you getting excited yet? Okay, so the reflex arc. Have you ever touched a hot pan? So you've got the sensory neurons, shoots down to the interneurons, then shoots down to the motor neurons. So eventually your brain does process the event. So it's like your brain is like, oh my gosh, this just happened. So you should have no clue that it happened. You become consciously aware of your reaction only after that it has occurred. So that's kind of like what I said before. Your brain knows first. You think your hand or whatever part of your body knows, but really it's your brain. Okay, so peripheral nervous system, the PNS, includes all of the neurons that are not in the central nervous system. Neurons are bundled together in collections called nerves. You have then two functional branches. You've got your somatic and autonomic nervous system. Your somatic nervous system basically are what controls all of your voluntary movements. So what movements are your somatic nervous system currently governing? All right, so if I were to ask you for some answers to this, you might tell me that when you doodle, when you tap your foot, this might help you understand the difference between voluntary and involuntary movements. Because when you're kind of doing those things, it's just kind of going. So that's kind of how the somatic nervous system works. I find myself now I'm tapping. The autonomic nervous system is the branch of the peripheral nervous system that controls involuntary processes. So what involuntary processes are your autonomic nervous system currently governing? So if I were to ask you, okay, what is something that you are automatically doing that your autonomic nervous system is in control of? You might tell me breathing, riding a bike, eating, anything like that. Those are things that are just autonomic and automatic. So then you have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. And again, this is what it looks like. So your sympathetic nervous system is responsible for everything on the left side. And then your parasympathetic is responsible for everything that is on the right side. All right, I told you before, nature-nurture is the biggest debate in psychology. We're going to skip over this. This is not something, we would do this if we were in class. So moving on to the endocrine system. Again, this is more fun stuff. Communication system that uses glands to convey messages by releasing hormones into the bloodstream. Hormones are chemical messengers that influence your mood, how you think, how you decide if you're going to eat or not, and a lot of other things. But we are going to skip that. This is kind of an overview of what the endocrine system looks like. This is a very, very interesting story. I always teach this to my psych students in high school. The girl with half a brain. It's a very interesting story about this little girl who she was experiencing these seizures and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And long story bearable, they had to remove half of her brain. And in doing so, they thought that she would not wake up the same. And it just goes to show you how much our brains, well, for children, are very malleable. And she was able to kind of live a pretty normal life. And her one side of her brain ended up kind of communicating to the other side of her brain, and it ended up working for her. So now she can do things. She's kind of she is a miracle in the medical world and in the psychological world. All right, so right brain, left brain. So you've got your cerebrum, your corpus callosum. And again, in my high school class, I usually have them do a brain project where they kind of take all of these parts of the brain and they kind of teach me about them through different methods. So I'm going to run through these real quick. So your cerebrum is the largest area of your brain. As you see in the picture, it has two distinct hemispheres. Your corpus callosum is the thick band of the fibers that connect your right and your left side. The right hemisphere controls the left, and then the left controls the right. So that's why in the little girl's case, when she had half her brain removed, the other side, she should have been paralyzed, but miraculously, she ended up being able to gain full control of that other side. All right, so hemispherectomies, that's what that little girl had. We're going to skip that. This is studying the split brain and kind of what it looks like if you were to have this type of surgery. So you can kind of look at that and see what's going on. All right, we are going to skip through that. All right, I do want you to know the difference between Broca's and Wernicke's area. So Broca's area is critical for speech production. So just know that Broca's area is what's responsible for speech production, and then Wernicke's area is what's responsible for language comprehension. So both of these were people that had this, issue in their brain. So this disorder was named after these people respectively. All right. All right, we're going to skip on that. That's part of the vignette. All right, so your right hemisphere, what that does, it can identify your mirror images and spatial relationships, your mentally rotating images, recognizing faces, being able to process emotional information, and then evaluating and rejecting things that lack support and evidence. And then the right hemisphere and language-related tasks specialize in understanding abstract and humorous use of language, and then somewhat better at following conversations that change topics. So when you're thinking about your humorous side of your language, that is your right side working for you. All right, this is more on Christina and her story that we are going to skip over right now. All right, so neuroplasticity, this is your brain's ability to heal, grow, make new connections. Because again, our brain is very malleable and it's fragile, and it's very important to take care of our brains. But many times our brains can regenerate and begin to work normally again when there is damage. Brain scan studies with blind children suggest that visual processing centers are being used for other purposes, such as understanding touch sensations. So they're doing more and more research into brain scanning and the ability for your brain to gain, to regain more of its plasticity. Ugh, got stuck on that one for a second. All right, so I'm going to skip through this. I don't need to. Okay. This is important. I do want you to know the difference between all of the lobes of the brain. You've got your frontal, parietal, occipital, and your temporal. Your frontal lobe is basically in charge of all of your executive decision making. So this is in front of your brain. It organizes all your information. It's in charge of the important decisions you make. This is when you take these riskier behaviors, this is what is not fully developed until the age of approximately 25 years old. But this is where all of the cognitive functions are occurring. Perception and all of those impulse control decisions are housed in the frontal lobe. Your parietal lobe are all of your senses. That's so when you feel touch, pressure, temperature, this part of the brain that's in control of that is your parietal lobe. Your occipital lobe is in charge of all of your visual information. And then your temporal lobe is everything that processes all of your auditory stimuli and your language. And this is also where the hippocampus and amygdala are stored, which we'll obviously go over that as well. All right, so here's just a visual of the four lobes of the brain. Again, I do want you to know the difference between the four lobes. Phineas Gage, know who he was. This was a classic study in psychology regarding the frontal lobe. So in 1848, he was basically working at his job on the railroad, and a spike went through his brain, as you can see in the picture. And you can see on his eye, it's completely shut. So it went straight through his cheek, through his brain. Believe it or not, he got up and he walked. He should have been dead, but what they did note from all of this through research is that the frontal lobe is responsible for changes in your personality. And so he was this mild-mannered guy that, was really nice. And then after his accident, he changed and became very angry, had a big outburst, and started cussing a lot. So they look at his study, or they took his, what happened to him, and that kind of exploded into this research of the frontal lobe. All right, so we're going to skip on through that. All right, so there's a lot of research on Albert Einstein and the parietal lobe. Obviously, after Einstein had, passed away, his brain was studied in depth because he has the most divots on his brain than any person that they've ever studied. So, the question is, do you think Einstein had a super brain? And what cautions do we need to take in interpreting this research finding? So these are just things that are consistently being researched. All right, so we're going to skip through that and that, don't worry. All right, so the table here, the regions of the cortex, again, the structures are broken down for you there to kind of help you process it, maybe just a little bit easier. Moving on to your association areas. Again, this chapter seems to kind of go on and on and on. But we're going to talk about your association areas. They are located in all areas of your brain, in every lobe. We're going to skip on by that. All right, so now we're going to cover the limbic system. That's where the amygdala is. So just know that the limbic system is a system, and this system is also housed in the temporal lobe. And within this system is where the thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus is located. Now, although it would be a good idea to know all of these things, for test purposes, I just want you to know what the responsibility is of the amygdala and the hippocampus. All right, on this next slide, this is just taking care of your hippocampus, which is your memories. These are your long-term memories. So if you want to kind of protect your brain and protect you from when you get older, these are foods that are very good for brain health and your memory, helping you with maybe kind of fighting off Alzheimer's or dementia when you get older. So eating walnuts, berries, cocoa, oily fish, and broccoli. All right, so you've got your brainstem, midbrain, hindbrain, and forebrain. These are all just kind of parts of the cortex. I'm going to kind of skip over. Your cerebellum literally just means little brain. Not anything that I'm going to go over in detail. So again, another chart for you so that you can look at these in more detail for the exam. All right, so there's some controversies. Obviously, there's always controversies in psychology about the his and her brain differences. It used to be, argued that women are better at, like English and literature and all those kind of things, and then men were better at the math and sciences. And we can see that in math and statistics, men are, a little bit higher on that. And then on the physical sciences, they're a little bit higher on that. And then engineering and computer science, they're markedly, bigger, their brains are more geared towards that, I should say. So male and female brains are far more alike than they are different. Even though it appears like engineer and science that women do this less, men do this more. When you look at the top two charts, math and science and physical science, they don't really differ super significantly. We are seeing more and more that more women are kind of going into those math and science careers more than they ever, did before. All right, so this is going to be the end of the vignette. Kind of wraps up the chapter and where he is now. So, can your brain change? The lovely answer to that is yes. So you should always expose yourself to new things. Like I said before, you want to keep your brain going. You want to keep your brain active so that when you do get older and you do retire, that your brain is, constantly learning. Because, once you retire, it's true. If you don't use it, you lose it. So that's it for this presentation. It was excruciating. I'm sorry. Not much I'm testing you on with this, but there are a few things. So just note the things I said to pay attention to. And everybody, be good to yourself and have a great week. Peace.